From the pasuk that says in regards to the mon that Vayomer Moshe Rabbeinu is speaking to the Yidden and telling them that he could eat the mon that had fallen on Friday, the double portion. Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, Ichlu hayoim, eat it today. That's on Shabbos. Ki Shabbos hayoim la Hashem, because today is a Shabbos for Hashem. Hayoim loisim tzu'u b'sada. Today you're not going to find it in the field. In this pasuk we have 3 times the word hayoim in regards to eating the mon on Shabbos. From this the Chazal learned the obligation of eating 3 meals on Shabbos. Now, even though a Seudah usually consists of eating bread, we find in regards to the 3rd meal that it's brought in Shulchan Aruch a machlokas of the poskim. There are opinions that for the 3rd meal one also needs to have bread. However, yesh mekilin, there are some that are lenient and say that you could fulfill the meal, the 3rd meal that is, with any food that's made of one of the 5 grains for which you would make boiri minim azoinis, because that too is called mazon, it's sustaining. Then there are those that are even more lenient. You could fulfill them 3rd meal with things that you would usually have along with bread, like meat and fish and the like. And finally, there are those that are lenient even more than this, that you could fulfill the 3rd meal even with fruit. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, after bringing the different opinions, concludes that ein lismach klal al kol zeh, one should not rely on any of this, unless it's impossible otherwise. For example, one is very full, and he wouldn't manage to eat bread without causing himself pain. On the other hand, says the Rebbe, nevertheless, it's known the minig of Rabbi Seinu Nesienu, of our Rabbeim, that in the most cases, they actually did not eat bread by the 3rd meal. They would be yoytze this Seudah with just tasting something, having some taste. And the reason for this is, since the 3rd Seudah is learned from the 3rd time that it says Hayoim in the Pasuk, and the 3rd time when it says Hayoim, the Torah says Hayoim loy simtzeu. Today you're not going to find the mon in the field. In other words, it's the word Hayoim is associated with loy, with negating the idea of finding the mon. And therefore it's also befitting that the 3rd meal is going to be noticeable by not having bread, like the loisim tzu'u of the mon, which the mon was considered a lechem. We know it was considered a lechem, the bread from heaven, etc. Now, the explanation, the inner explanation, the deeper explanation of this is as it's explained in Chassidus, and that is that the 3rd Seudah corresponds to the time of the Shabbos of La'asid Lavoi, the time when Mashiach is going to come, which is called a day that's all Shabbos, as it also says in the Bach. Now, regarding the time of La'asid Lavoi, it says that Olam Haba ein boi lo yachila v'lo yshiyah, that in Olam Haba there's no eating and no drinking. And the Hamshacha at that time, the revelation at that time, is from the level of Ayin, as it says in the Bechaya. Ayin is similar to Loy. In other words, it's a level that's beyond, that's completely beyond everything. We call it Ayin, nothing, meaning in the sense that it's completely beyond our comprehension, etc. And therefore, the meal that we have is also not a regular meal. Rather, what's emphasized is this idea of the Loy. In other words, the idea that loisim too, we're not going to have the bread. We are going to be yotzei just by having something else. Says the Rebbe, our holy Torah is a Torah achas, it's a unified Torah. And Pnimiyus HaTorah, and the minhagim that are based on Pnimiyus HaTorah, along with the Chelek halacha sheb'Torah, are obviously all one. That means that all parts of the Torah need to fit with each other, and they all are united and come out together. And therefore it's understood that the minig of G'dolei Yisrael, and those that go in their paths, those that act lechatchila, al pi pnimiyus HaTorah, in other words, this is the way that lechatchila acting by not washing for this meal, is not an inyan of a kula of just being lenient, or an inyan or of just a b'diev, that someone would be just b'dievet al pi halacha from their part, chas v'shalom. Obviously, to try to do the mitzvah in the very, very best way. And therefore, we need to understand, yes, it's true that according to the explanation, the 3rd meal is beyond eating. And therefore, that's the reason we're not going to have bread. But al pi halacha, we said earlier, it is, at the end of the day, it is a kula, it is a leniency. In fact, the Alter Rebbe said, regarding the various different leniencies, the ein lismoich klal al kol, one should not rely on the leniencies of having other things instead of bread, unless it's a situation of b'diavad where the person is completely full from earlier. So how does that fit with the idea that according to Chassidus, it would actually be considered a hidur not to eat bread? Says the Rebbe, we could explain it in the following way. Regarding the mitzvah of eating 3 meals on Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe says that the mitzvah of Seudah Shabbos is only for the purpose of oineg, of having pleasure on Shabbos. That means that by all 3 meals, the obligation is not the eating per se, the eating of bread per se for itself, in and of itself, but rather it's more about the pleasure that one has. And according to this, that by all su'udos, the tzivui, this command of having the su'udos, is mainly associated with the oineg, with the pleasure, not so much with the eating for itself. So in a case where a person actually has pain from the fact that he's eating, so then not only isn't there an obligation for him to eat, but rather there is actually a certain obligation for him not to eat. And when the Alter Rebbe says, Ein tzorich letzayres atzmo lechel, he doesn't need to cause himself pain to eat this meal if he's not enjoying it, possibly could even mean that he's shouldn't or he's even not allowed to eat. Because this sort of eating is going to be the opposite of the point of what Seudah Shabbos is about, is going to be the opposite of pleasure. In fact, says the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe says this very, very clearly in regards to the concept of fasting on Shabbos and not eating on Shabbos. And the Alter Rebbe says, someone that food is actually harmful for him, it causes him pain, then it would be considered an oinig, a tainig for him not to eat. Says the Alter Rebbe, then he does not have to eat at all on Shabbos. In fact, the Alter Rebbe says, ukimat she'asur lo lechel, it's almost like forbidden to him to eat, so that he shouldn't have pain on Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, just like it is in regards to eating generally, so too in regards to what you eat, the details of the food. If a person is going to have pain from eating bread by this particular Seudah of Shabbos, so then, b'lechatchila, he doesn't have an obligation to eat the bread. And again, on the contrary, if he eats the bread, he's going to be doing something that's the opposite of the whole point of Seudah Shabbos. So now let's apply it in this case. According to this, says the Rebbe, the fact that there is a chiyuv of achilas pas, of eating bread in the 3rd meal, is only going to be by a person that's having pleasure from it. Whereas if the person is not having pleasure from eating the bread, and why isn't he having pleasure? Because he believes be'emunah shleima, that in the time of Seudah Shlishis, in the time of this 3rd meal, which is called Raiva Derayvin. Literally, Raiva Derayvin means the time of the desire or the will of all wills, the highest level of Ratzon, highest level of Tainug, is shining from above. What's shining at this time is that level that we call Hayoim Loi, the level of Ayin, the level that's beyond everything. This is a time that's similar to Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is also called Shabbos Shabbosin. It's similar to Me'ein Olam Haba, similar to that time where there's no eating and no drinking. And when he realizes that this is what's going on at this particular time, therefore it's going to be a tsar for him, it's going to be a pain for him to eat bread. If that's the case, then from the outset there's no obligation for him to eat bread at this meal. And adarab, for him it would be considered a hidur al pi halacha that he should not have the tsar of eating bread, but rather it will just be yotzeh the Seudah by tasting something, by having something. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand the minig of our Rabbeim to be yotzeh the Seudah just by having something small, by tasting something, because they felt this oil that's shining by this 3rd meal, and of course the Hasidim that are makusher to them, connected to them, and learning their Torah, and learning the Torah in order to fulfill what the Rabbeim tell us, also go in their ways. Says the Rebbe, we still need to understand. Since in the time of Minchas Shabbos is shining this very high level that we called Hayoim Loi, the level that's beyond everything, and it's not involved. It's not about eating. So seemingly we shouldn't be eating anything during that time. To make the comparison to Yom Kippur we're not allowed to eat at all. In fact, we find by Rashbi that he had exchanged the Seudah Shlishis in a case of Erev Pesach, which was Shabbos. So Rashbi instead said Divrei Torah in matters of Ma'aseh Merkava, so there was no eating at all. So why is it that we say that you do have to eat something, at least something, fruit or something you do have to eat? Says the Rebbe, in some places in Chassidus it sounds like, it's implied, that the fact that by Seudah Shlishis we still eat something not like Yom Kippur, where we completely don't eat, it is not because that there is a certain advantage in eating by this third meal, but rather the opposite, because at the end of the day, it's only similar to Olam Haba where there's no food and drink. It's only similar to Yom Kippur, but we're not quite there yet, and therefore we still have to eat something. So it sounds like it's making it a certain chisaron, it's something less about this meal, that we're not up to that level of completely not eating, so we have to eat at least something. However, says the Rebbe, in a Reshima of the Friedrich Rebbe, in the name of his father, the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Nishmas Eden, is written, we have this in Ayoim Yoim as well, and he says, Ha de Seudah Shlishis, the Seudah Shlishis, Hayoim Loi, the fact that the third meal is connected with this idea of Hayoim Loi, means that you don't have to have bread, but you still have to taste something. And then he quotes from the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Yehi Chelki, my portion should be of those that eat the 3 meals. Says the Rebbe, from the Loshen, from the wording of this particular Rishima, and from the Hemshech, from the flow of the Inyanim in this particular Rishima, where it says you should taste something, and then for this he brings the Maimer of Rabbi Yossi, Yehi Chelki, my portion should be from those that eat 3 meals, it actually seems like that having at least something by the third meal is actually is a special milah, is a special great thing of having something by this third meal. He's quoting Rabbi Yosef, my portion should be of those that have from the 3 meals. That doesn't sound like it's a chisaron. At least you're having something. In other words, again, the way we said before, it sounded like we're not up to the level of not eating anything, so we have to have something. But from this pisgam that the Friedrich is bringing from the name of his father, it sounds like it's the other way around. It sounds like we're saying you should taste something and bring from Rabbi Yossi. I wish, my portion should be from those people that have something at all 3 meals. And the Rebbe says the question is, why is the Rebbe Rasha bringing this saying of Rabbi Yossi as a proof to to this idea of having 3 meals? If he's speaking about the actual obligation that you need to eat a third meal al pi halacha, then seemingly in this statement he should have first of all brought this chiyuv, the idea one needs to eat 3 meals. And if he's just trying to bring out the point of the inner reason why you have to taste something, have something by the third meal, then how are you proving that from Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yossi says you should have 3 meals. What's the proof that you just taste something? So the Rebbe says the explanation is like this, by first explaining what Rabbi Yossi is actually saying. Because seemingly we have a question. The obligation of eating 3 meals of Shabbos is an explicit din in the Gemara over there. So what does it mean when Rabbi Yossi says he's wishing upon himself, Yehei Chelki, my portion should be from those that have 3 meals? What do you mean your portion should be? You're supposed to have 3 meals. So the Maharsha explains that the reason why Rabbi Yossi is saying Yehei Chelki miyoichlei shalosh sudas, and so too when he says Yehei Chelki regarding some of the other things that are brought there in Gemara, is just sort of to give more encouragement to people how important this is and so on. However, the Rebbe says this doesn't seem to be completely understood. Because by those inyonim that are a hidur, that are just doing something extra, or a midas chasidus, etc., so we could say this expression, Yehei Chelki, that in other words, I wish my portion was also amongst these people. I hope I'm going to be able to do this as well. I want to make sure I do this in order to encourage people to do this. But seemingly you can't say this about something that's an absolute obligation everyone has to do, is to eat the 3 meals. Now, you might say the Rebbe is preempting, and the Rebbe is going to say why you can't say that. The Rebbe says you might want to say that Rabbi Yossi was actually referring to the concept of hachacham ein of beroishay. In other words, Rabbi Yossi is trying to tell you, be clever, be smart in advance, don't fill yourself up in the morning meal, so that you'll be able to eat the 3rd meal. So the Rebbe says it's difficult to say that for such an obvious thing, Rabbi Yossi needs to be wishing himself, Yehei Chelki, my portion should be of those that eat 3 meals. So how do we understand it? So the Rebbe explains. When we say Olam Haba ein bo lo yachil v'lo yishtia, that Olam Haba there's no food and no drink, doesn't mean that we're going to lose the whole quality of the Yiddish guf, of the Yiddish body. That suddenly it's going to be lost, the body, the Yiddish body, or at least the importance of the Yiddish body. Rather, ein b'le'achilav lo'ishtiya means that in olam haba, the connection between the body and the soul is not going to be dependent, is not going to be through physical food and drink. In other words, it's going to be the body and all of the greatness of the body. It's not going to have to rely on the food and drink. As it's known that Chassidus paskins, according to the Ramban, that the shleimus of olam haba is in the time of after Tchiyas HaMesim, when we're going to have neshamis inside of physical bodies. Because the Yiddish body on its own has a tremendous milah, tremendous virtues. Says the Rebbe, according to this, we can now explain that this is why we say there is a milah in having at least something for the third meal. And why is that? Since the Seudah is supposed to be me'ein la'asid lavoi, similar to the time of la'asid lavoi, which then too there will be a guf that's going to be getting reward. For the same reason, our guf right now also has to feel something in this Seudah, some sort of pleasure. And therefore it does need to taste something, it needs to have something. Together with, on the one hand, that we have this idea of ayin, of loisimtzu, of negating having a proper full meal with the bread and all of that. But there's also the idea that we're still emphasizing, but yes, there is going to be a body, and there is still ideas that where the body is benefiting. And therefore, so on the one hand, we're not having the bread, but on the other hand, we're still having something. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, it says very, very clearly in a number of places that the Seudah of the Livyasan and the Shoyra Bar of L'Asid Lavoi is going to be a physical Seudah. Says the Rebbe, V'yesh Loimar, that the hint to all of this, that's why we do taste something, we do have something. But the Rebbe says in a brackets, it's a chidush gadol, and tzarech iyun v'chipus, we have to look and search to find some basis for this. But this is what the Rebbe is saying, that when we're eating right now, this is really to symbolize and to be connected to the Livyasan, to the Shoyra Bar that we're going to have, and again, more generally, the idea that we're going to have a guf, and therefore our guf right now is also deriving pleasure from food. The Rebbe takes it to a deeper level, but oimik yoyser yeshleimar. The fact that the full schar la'asid lava, the shleimus of the schar, is going to be specifically to a neshama beguf, is because at that point is going to be nizgala, the advantage of the guf over the neshama, to the extent that it says that the neshama is going to be sustained from the guf. That means to say that the neshama needs the body so that it could feel the level of atzmusay umuhusay yizbarech, the very essence of Hashem, who's mitziusay me'atzmusay. That Hashem's existence is just by himself. So it usually says that it's only the guf that has this idea. The guf is created by the very essence of Hashem. And the neshama is going to be appreciating, being able to tap into this level that the guf is connected with, dafka through the guf. Says the Rebbe, according to this, we could say regarding this third meal, that the fact that we do have to eat something, and we said that this is actually coming as an expression of something great. Not, we can't fast, so we're at least having something. The opposite, we're dafka having something. What we're trying to emphasize is exactly this point, the mila of the guf. That there is still the idea that we're associated with the guf and with the gashmis of the guf, and therefore at least having something. And therefore it expresses even more this idea of the Shabbos, L'Asid Lavoi, when we are going to see the greatness of the guf. Says the Rebbe, so this is the inner meaning of what Rabbi Yossi was saying. When he said, that my portion should be from those that eat 3 meals of Shabbos, what he's saying is that he should be able to eat, in other words, at least have something by this third meal, and that should be a pleasure for him. Again, in other words, there is the way of saying that it's fine, you just don't have a third meal because L'Asid Lavoi, there's no food and drink. But Rabbi Yossi is saying the opposite. He's coming to make this point. I want my portion to be from those that at least have something by the third meal. In other words, to be able to have some sort of enjoyment, to be able to feel the milah that will be nizgala, L'Asid Lavoi, the milah of the guf. I want to be able to feel that right now by the Suda Shlishis as well. And therefore, this is why it's a raya, why the Rebbe Rasha why he's bringing the point from Rabbi Yossi. Since Rabbi Yossi is saying this expression, Yehei Chelki, my portion should be of those that have 3 meals. Even though this is a meal regarding which it says Hayoim Loi, and yet he's saying, I want my portion to be than those that do have something by the third meal. He's giving the koyach that we should be able to eat something by this third meal, and in a way that it does express the mila. We're wishing upon ourselves, yei chelki, how I wish I could have this. In other words, not only that then when I'm eating, it's not diminishing from the hayoim loy, which is what originally the way we looked at it. Hayoim loy, maybe we shouldn't have any food at all, but we're having a little bit. So we say, no, on the contrary, the fact that we're having something is actually representing the greatest milah of the Shabbos of the future, where the neshama is benefiting and being sustained by the body.